because two sermons, two for the price of one, two sermonettes, I guess you call it. As Randy said, both of us are going to be sharing to you a little about our identity as religious naturalists. I've titled mine "My Dive into the Sacred Depths of Nature." So Randy, he did not choose to be my intern because of this identity. We did not know this when we connected and decided to do this. We later found out that we both identified as religious naturalists. And this was actually his idea, that we both share a message about this on the same Sunday. So if you don't like it, it's his fault. Now, you notice I said religious naturalists, not religious naturists. We don't go out to that labyrinth behind my house and run around there sky clad, okay? Not religious naturalists, religious naturalists. Well, here's my story. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about my journey to getting to that identity for myself. When I first became a member of UU, I started going regularly. I knew I was UU even way before that. When I started going regularly out, the Unitarian church was meeting on campus at that time at the nursing building on campus. We didn't have our own place. And then we did build a place on Grady Street that was our own first little home that was ours, and moved there. And the word got out. Before then, I think a lot of people didn't know we existed at all because we didn't have our own home. And then the word got out in the community among some other folks that there was this church over there, our congregation called Unitarian Universalist. And Rev.Jane at that time was the minister at the Presbyterian Church. He also was a regular columnist for the Statesboro Herald. They would have him do a column about religion. And so we got a message on our voicemail that he would like to interview a couple of us about Unitarian Universalism. Well, guess who volunteered? Me and Sherry Barr. We said, yeah, we'll talk to him. So we went and we explained to him about UU. We told him about the principles and how this is what a part of who we were, that we did not have a creed. We told him about our sources that we pulled from. We told him about the people that came and their differing theologies and beliefs, and the fact that in our little congregation we had right then, we had people who identified as Christian, Jewish. At that time, we had a person that was coming regularly every Sunday that was Muslim. We had pagans, of course. We had humanists, agnostics, atheists, all there together, sharing love and lifting up these principles and lifting up our shared values at the time. But we also emphasized to him that we were not a new religion. We had evolved from two Christian religions, Unitarianism and Universalism, and then we built on that Judeo-Christian background. So after we had shared all that very succinctly and nicely and well, I think, shared with him, he got more personal. He looked at us and he said, "But are you a Christian? Are you a Christian?" Well, I struggled with that a good bit, especially after I left the Baptist church and went to my halfway house, which was the Clifton Park Methodist. I knew I was a UU because I'd already found out about it on television and ordered the materials and hoping they came in a little brown wrapper I could hide from my husband. But I knew I was UU, but I thought, well, I'm still trying to save my marriage. I'll go with this more inclusive Methodist church that will actually let me preach, and they did let me train me as one of the lay ministers, and I did get to preach there. So while I was there, I sort of rationalized, as many people do, about things like that. And I said, well, I can identify as a Christian because I love the teachings of Jesus. I try to follow the teachings of Jesus. And Christian principles I think are important, that love and understanding and caring and do unto others and all of those things. And so yes, I can rationalize and identify as a Christian. But then I also began to really worry about the authenticity of that in this community. If I identified as a Christian, was I being inauthentic because I knew what that meant to most people, I thought, and I thought what they're thinking of is not what I am. It's not who I am. And so when he asked me, it sort of put me on the real spot. especially him being a reporter for the newspaper in Statesboro, Georgia, where I was a native and grew up and had, well, you know. So I said to him, well, what do you mean by Christian? He gave me his definition of what he meant by Christian. And so I took the risk and responded, well, no, I'm not a Christian. Not by your definition, I am not a Christian. I still was kind of vague in terms of how I identified I wanted just to be a Unitarian Universalist because I enjoyed connecting with everybody. I love doing the things with pagans and going to Women's Spirit and doing those things. I got into reading more Buddhist teachings, Thich Nhat Hanh and others, and enjoyed some meditation. I was, you know, I really love science and reading a lot of about all kinds of things with that, and I love the humanist writings and others. So I just wanted to be vague. I did take a survey, and the survey was, you answer these questions and we'll tell you what you are. So I took the survey and it said I was a humanist. Okay. Humanism, I could understand why I got categorized in that category, you know. But I kind of didn't like that word because it felt a little too human to me, like to put humanity at the center of that. So that's the only thing to check. I'll check it. But I wasn't quite satisfied with that. I went to seminary in 2001, wanting to be my vague self related to my theology. They said, no, you have to articulate your theology. You can't just say, I'm a Unitarian Universalist. You're in seminary now. You've got to figure it out and be able to articulate it. Okay. Thought about using neo-humanism. Then I found out some people have already opted for that word to mean something that I wasn't. So yeah, I didn't know. But summer 2003, I went back up. Sometimes going, yeah, we had to go in January. We could go in the summers for intensive. So we went to the little apartment up there in Chicago and took classes. Two of the classes that I took were from Jerry Stone and Carl Peters. Jerry was at Meadville, the UU seminary. Carl Peters was at the Presbyterian Seminary. At that time, both of those seminaries and others were at Hyde Park on the University of Chicago campus. And they had a consortium that we could take classes from each other's seminaries and it would count in our programs. So I took one from Carl as well as one from Jerry. I didn't realize it at the time, but both of them, I had written books on religious naturalism and both identified as religious naturalists. So I enjoyed reading their books. I connected with them. And the way it is at Meadville Lombard, as Randy knows, you take the intensive classes for all your class hours. So you get all your class hours done in a week. But then you do a lot of the work before you go, and you do your big paper after you check the class, your term paper, I guess we would call it in college. It's your big project. Yeah. So I got the idea that I could do a 2-for-1, since they I knew they identified as religious naturalists. So I said, how about if I do a reader's theater, because I've done that with some of my other kinds of research at Georgia Southern, done reader's theater. How about if I do a reader's theater, and I have a conversation between me, they knew each other, me and the two of you, and use your books and stuff as part of that conversation. So that's what I did. I imagined that I had invited them to my little apartment and that I had had a conversation about religious naturalism. I used their words from their books with some transition words like, well, another idea is, have you thought about this? Just little transitions, but the rest of them were actually quoting from their ideas and then mine thrown in there as well. Now, at the end of this imaginary conversation, I had them asking me, well, have we convinced you to join IRIS? IRIS is not international, what was IRIS? Forgot what the I is. Institute of Religion and Science. Now it's the Institute of Religion in the Age of Science. They all did that at Star Island. And so they asked me, they convinced me, and I said, no. Let me first of all tell you a little bit about religious naturalism. What I was saying, no, you hadn't quite convinced me yet. I'm on the road, but maybe not yet. I didn't share with you that Jerry, there are two kinds of religious naturalism. There's theistic religious naturalism and non-theistic religious naturalism. Some people might say atheistic, but that has a negative connotation in many people, so they say non-theistic religious naturalism. Jerry was a non-theistic and Carl was a religious theistic naturalism. Now, when I say theistic religious naturalism, I mean, he used a lot more God in that language. But his God was not like what most people think of as God. When the vast majority of Americans say they believe in God, they have a supernatural deity in mind who is thought of in terms as the man upstairs, the Heavenly Father, the person the baseball player is pointing to give credit to something else other than steroids. So the God of theistic religious naturalists is not a supernatural deity. It's a power or force within the natural universe. You, theologian Henry Netson Wyman, referred to God as the power of creativity. Others speak of God as the spirit of love that pervades all beings. So it's a kind of power. They may define it differently, but it's within the natural universe. And Jerry, as I said, identified as a non-theistic religious naturalist, but their views were very similar. The only thing different was one used some God language in it, but they were talking about the same thing. Here's a simplistic definition. Religious naturalism says two things. First, it holds that the natural universe is all there is. The supernatural does not exist. Second, it maintains that there is religious meaning and value in nature. So the natural is all that exists, but there's religious meaning and value in nature. So we had the conversation, and they asked me about going to Iris, and was I convinced? I said, I'm listening. I'm not quite there. I almost made it to Iris in 2007. I mean, they meet on Star Island. And that was the year that Star Island had to close because they shut them down because they didn't meet some standards or something. And I already had my reservation. So I didn't make it, and I haven't been trying to make it again, but I've gotten in some other groups that have been very meaningful. The main thing that helped me and what won me over, what made me come to the altar was reading Ursula Goodenoug's books, The Sacred Depths of Nature. And that's why I've actually put the dive into the sacred depths of nature. That is the one that helped me to identify. It helped me to say, yes, I am a religious naturalist. Ursula's book has like two parts in it, each chapter. The first part of the chapter will be science, and it'll tell all about the cell. She's a cell biologist, a very well-known professor, and wrote a book that's textbook on genetics that was adopted by lots of folks. But the first part is science, and she explains it in a way that a layperson, at least a science-leaning layperson, one that appreciates it and kind of likes science, would understand. And she explains it in beautiful language that sounds almost sacred itself to me. But the last part of her chapter is almost a devotional. She puts in a hymn or a poem or something that will draw us in and connect to whatever that science was. So I really liked it, and I think it was because I didn't need to just understand it. I needed to feel it. And Ursula Goodenough helped me to feel it. That's a big part of conversion anyway, isn't it? Come to Jesus, come to Ursula, whatever. You gotta feel something. You gotta feel something. And she had me feeling religious naturalism. So now if somebody asks me, what is your sacred text? I have many actually, but they want to know what is your primary sacred text? I said, it's the Sacred Depths of Nature by Ursula Goodenough. Now, don't get me wrong. I love to study life. It's not that I just love these natural parts. I love to study. I find the work being done in genes to be so intriguing. I don't necessarily have to have the poetry to go with it. For instance, scientists have discovered that all living things on this planet today share a huge number of genes. Current estimates indicate that human nuclear DNA is 98.4% identical to chimpanzee DNA. 98.4%. So most of my genes are like most chimpanzee genes. And they're also like many genes in a mushroom. We are deeply interrelated with the rest of the living world. And the more we find out about that, the more intriguing and awesome it is. So why don't folks like Jerry and Carl and Ursula and me and Randy, why don't we just worship in the woods? Well, we do. We go out, we enjoy getting out in nature. I love to ride that trike under those big trees at St. Simon's and go walk around that labyrinth and all those trees with all that stuff going on and look at those, even looking at the things that are growing on the trees. It's just gives me energy, gives me peace, and makes me be in awe. But we need more than that. We need more of that, and that's part of evolution as well. Many of us have the need for something like religious community and a faith of some kind. And they studied that, and it seems to be something that has evolved, and scientists are learning more and more about the brain and religion all the time. In any case, when we participate in worship services and rituals with others, we experience true reverence. Reverence is that religious emotion elicited when we perceive the sacred. And it calls us to our higher potential. Just like Moses, when he went to that mountaintop, that's why we call it a mountaintop experience. He went to that mountaintop. He was called to his higher potential when he experienced that sacredness there. And I experience it when I read the words of Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, or when I participate in pagan rituals, as I meditate and study the Four Noble Truths of Buddha, as I become involved in social justice activities. I can sing praises to God or the Spirit of life, and I am filled with an appreciation for this wonderful world. I don't have to believe every single word literally in the songs to understand the deeper meaning that the words represent. I get it. So, I profess my faith with Ursula Goodenough, who says, for me, the existence of all this complexity and awareness and intent and beauty, and my ability to apprehend it, serves as the ultimate meaning and the ultimate value. The continuation of life reaches around, grabs its own tail, and forms a sacred circle that, for some of us, requires no further justification, no creator, no superordinate meaning of meaning, no purpose other than the continuation continue until the sun collapses or the final meteor collides. So this is my theology, folks. I'm a religious naturalist because I believe in life before death. Now we're going to sing a very special nature song. We've sung it in here before from our hymnal, but Mo has added some other, she didn't want the credit. But anyway, you'll enjoy this. It has two voices instead of one. So,
brought my spirit to the sea. I stood upon the shore. I gave the morning dignity. I heard the waters roar. And then there came a sense of peace. Some whisper of my soul. Some ancient ministry of songs that make my spirit grow. I brought my spirit to the trees, and to the depths of sky. I touched each wandering hand and freed me with God's snow. And then I felt an inner flame that fiercely burned my tears. From and made me to freely ask me.
I will also admit that not only did Jane and I not know that what we were before we met, but we've had zero contact about what we're going to talk about. So it's interesting to see how our paths have been parallel. And then there's a place to which, like in nature, when you walk through the woods, there's a choice and you can take paths a different way. From this pulpit, for those of you who have been here, I've actually talked about, as a child, my connection with nature, talking with the trees, sitting in trees, all those things and my love for it. And I may have also mentioned where my split with the church came from. I was very, very involved with the Episcopal Church. I was a lay minister in the Episcopal Church. And one Sunday, I had done altar calls. I had done all the things, been with people speaking in tongues, all the things. And I was a member of a very liberal Episcopal diocese in Colorado and a very liberal Episcopal church that did a lot with social, that's where I got my start with social justice and all those things. And one Sunday I was up there as a vested chalice minister. For those who don't know what it is, I look like a priest, except for I don't have a stole on. And I'm assisting with communion. And we were going through communion, and as part of that process, when you go through the communion of the Episcopal Church, you recite the Nicene Creed. And halfway through the Nicene Creed, God, the divine, whatever, spoke to me and said, "You don't believe this, do you?" They didn't. And so for me, it was that moment where I loved and still love much about the Episcopal Church. I tell people there's nothing better than the smells and bells on a high holiday in the Episcopal Church. But knowing that, I couldn't stay. I felt I was being a hypocrite. And so I left the Episcopal Church. And I didn't go back to church. Until, like many people, I had children. It's like, I want my children to have something, somewhere to go. And it turned out one of the midwives who had helped deliver my youngest child said, "You need to come to our Unitarian church. You'll love it there." So I went. And the first Sunday I went was right after there had been a big brouhaha and they had asked their minister to leave. And I had been through that and I said, "I ain't doing that again." And I left. One Sunday, they were very nice people. Wonderful woman met me at the door, introduced me like we do here. And I left. And a couple of years later, I was at a neighborhood birthday party with my older son and ran into a person that we recognized each other and realized it was at that Unitarian church. And I said, "Yeah, I'd been there. I just, with the minister leaving and stuff, it wasn't." She goes, "Oh no, we just hired a wonderful new minister. You need to come and hear him preach." All right, packed up my boys and off we went to the Unitarian church on a Sunday where the minister was in the process of moving to town and was not in the pulpit. So instead of hearing Greg Ward, who a lot of us know, I got to hear a member of the church talk about how they were in the battle for their life with lung cancer. And how cancer had changed their life for the better. And I sat there and I thought, if this is the kind of place where we could hear that kind of message and empower a person to speak like that, I'll try it. I'll give it a shot. So I started coming, and that was 28 years ago. And like Jane, my path was odd. I had people ask me, "What is your spiritual belief?" when I was in the church, and I still define myself as a Christian. With an asterisk, and I even said that I'm a Christian with an asterisk. I believe in the teachings of Jesus, but I do not necessarily believe that everything that was written in the Bible is true, as they would tell you in some of the older churches. And so that's what my belief was. And it was met by some skepticism. Some people actually saying, "Well, we don't need to cater to you because Christians got other places they can go on Sunday morning," which wasn't the case for me. I didn't have any other place to go on Sunday. But I stayed. And I decided to take a journey. In 2018, I started thinking about maybe I should go to seminary because my UU church had asked me to preach a few times and I had liked it and it fit. And in 2019, I went to Meadville Law. And at that same introductory class that Jane talked about, when they ask you to define your theology because you have to know who you are, secret, Jane didn't reveal, but I will, it changes. So just say that. But I define myself as a Christian UU. And people are like, "What does that mean?" And as I explained what a Christian UU is. But I never felt good in my own skin doing this. I knew what it meant to me, but again, like so many others, when you hear the word Christian, what does it mean to be a Christian? They think of more traditional belief systems. The Baptist church, the Episcopal church for me, those things, and they didn't fit me. It didn't fit me at all. But I continued. And then about 2 years ago, I found myself to the point where, and just so you know where my journey is in seminary, I have finished all of my academic work. Internship is, and my CPE training is all I have left. I had finished my academic work and I had one class I had to take. One class. And the only class that they offered was a class I really didn't want to take. It was called Call of the Wild. It's taught by Dr. Nicole Kirk. Phenomenal teacher. But all right, I think it was about the interaction between nature and indigenous religions and so forth. I thought, I'll take it because I got to get something done. Well, guess what? In that Call of the Wild class, we read a book called, and this is one of my sacred texts. Jane talks about our sacred text. It was written by Robin Wall Kimmerer. A lot of people know Robin Wall Kimmerer from her very famous book, Braiding Sweetgrass, which is an amazing book. If you ever get a chance to read it, I gave it away for Christmas a couple of years to all my relatives. But Robin Wall Kimmerer's book, but it wasn't Braiding Sweetgrass. It was a book called Gathering Moss. And in Gathering Moss, Dr. Kimmerer, who is a biologist of some renown, talks about the role of moss and fungi in the earth and how they interconnect and spread their tendrils and build mushrooms and how everything talks to each other and how nature is interconnected and talks with one another. And I said, that's really cool. And that's something I've felt like I've known my whole life. You know, I mentioned before, you know, in one of my sermons, how I like to talk to trees and I hear trees. And I like to interact with nature and feel that. And this Gathering Moss connected with me to the point was like, oh, this makes sense. And so I had a discussion with my minister of my home congregation, Reverend Dave Dunn, who was a friend of Jane's and mine. And Dave said, I think you're a religious naturalist. It's like, what's that? And so I went through and a lot of study and a lot of look and a lot of books we read in this Call of the Wild class and trying to figure out what it meant for me. And there was one quote from Gathering Moss that stuck with me and is still part of me. And it says, in a cascade of discovery, the invisible was suddenly made visible. And realized what I was seeing in nature, what I was feeling in nature was the divine talking to me, that interconnection. Now here's a place where paths divide, and one of my paths divides from something that Jane said this morning that I did not know. And that's a whole idea of religious naturalists and the supernatural. Well, I believe in the supernatural. I see it in that space between, as the sun flashes between leaves when the wind is blowing a little bit in the spring. And I feel that supernatural feeling of being present with God, like the other morning when I got back from Chicago in the evening and pulled into my driveway, and standing in the middle of my driveway was a deer looking at me. She didn't run off afraid, but she stopped and looked at me. And in her eyes was the divine. Was that thing that I call God? And so that's where I come from. This interaction between what is nature and what is God, and the understanding of what the stories that Jesus talked about, and how we're supposed to be interconnected with one another, and how that our interconnectedness in this congregation. I mean, look around at the wonderful mesh of humanity we have in here, and how that is so similar to what we see in nature with the interconnectedness. And how nature and man interconnect. This morning I woke up and walked into the kitchen to say good morning to Mike and Adrian, and it said, Adrian asked me if I needed some breakfast or anything. I said, no, I think I'm gonna take a walk this morning. And she goes, may I make a recommendation? I said, absolutely. She says, go over and walk on the trail that's behind the Olive Garden. And I said, okay, I'll do that. I'll go over there. And it was beautiful, and it was peaceful, and it's gorgeous. And I only did a short piece of it because I'm tiny. But I noticed something when I was out there. As I'm walking to the left was nature at its fullest. The trees and the quiet and the squirrels and were playing and the leaves and the birds that were singing and the water and all the wonderful things about nature. And I looked to the right and there were some trees, but there was also the back of a shopping center. That place, that greenway was a space where man was that connecting point between man and nature. How we can coexist together. That's how I see my world. You know, Jane talked a little bit about the different definitions, and I've thought about my definition of being a religious naturalist. And, you know, she talked about the two veins there being theological and not. So I started coming up with different names that might come up with me. I could be called a theo-religious naturalist. Because I do have some feelings of theology. Or you could reverse that and say a religious theo-naturalist. Or a believer in theological religious naturalism, and all that seems like a lot of words to say that religious naturalism helps describe the way Randy sees the face of God. So, man.